All right, question from the 717 service from this last week has to do with obey all civil authority, and then we look back at American history and we have some moments where, America is kind of basically built on the notion of not obeying civil authority, where in the 1770s, individuals gathered together in America and revolt against the crown of England. And so the question is, well, is that okay or not? And the short answer to that is, boy, that is really hard to know because, first of all, we weren't there. We don't know what's going on in the hearts and minds of the individuals there. Secondly, is the prohibition in Romans 13 strikes me more as a reference to individuals. Like, for instance, if I say, I don't like the speed limit being 65, I'm going to ignore that and go 80. Or I don't like the restriction to not be able to text while I'm driving or text while I'm in a school zone, and so I'm going to rebel against that, is a really different thing than a repressive government taxing without representation, feeling, that kind of thing, where individuals practice what we would call corporate civil disobedience, where they together say, we're going to rebel against this. And so there are times of examples that we gave on Sunday night of individuals rebelling against the Crown of England. John Bunyan, for one, refused to stop preaching the gospel. You have examples all the way back in biblical times, though, of the nation of Israel revolting against the Egyptian government, whereas a corporate body, you could say, well, God brought them to that. And I think some of the leaders in America felt like God was leading them to revolt against what they felt were unjust and unfair conditions. And so that makes it difficult because if you say, I don't think an individual American should have said, I'm not going to pay taxes on this tea, but it's a different matter when a whole corporate body says, no, we're rebelling completely against this. I think it does have a little different flair or flavor to it. But on all of these things, as you look back in history, did the South have the right to rebel against the North in the Civil War? Did America have the right to revolt against England? And then as nations like Eastern Germany and the Wall falls, did they have the right to rebel against the invaders, the Russians? And surely at some point you start saying, well, somewhere in there's so much injustice that the individuals within that culture have a right, a divine right to seek justice and can do so corporately. I think what the prohibition of Romans 13 is about is not those kinds of things, but about someone saying, I don't like paying taxes to the Roman government, so I'm just not going to do it. Or someone saying, I'm going to cheat on my taxes, or I'm going to cheat on this rule or that rule. So I think it's more individuals circumventing or shortcutting government requirements for their own personal benefit. And I would distinguish that from individuals saying there's a real injustice here, and it's not just injustice for me, but all my neighbors, and out of my love for them, I'm going to do something to intervene on their behalf or try to intervene on their behalf. And so you see it in people like Gandhi, who did it in India. You see it in individuals like, many of the rebellions within Nazi Germany, where obey every civil authority. Clearly, Dietrich Bonhoeffer didn't do that, but his reasoning for revolting, it wasn't his own personal benefit. His reason for Bonhoeffer's rebellion was to undercut what he saw was explicit evil. And the same with Corrie ten Boom, who's clearly violating Nazi Germany's requirement for not hiding Jewish people, and she and her family, her dad, violate that rule, and they do so not out of personal gain. It's not a rebellion for personal gain, but out of a corporate good. So I think that's where I would distinguish too, is that it does seem like Paul's primarily talking about individuals who go, well, I'm not going to pay my taxes, or I'm not going to drive the speed limit out of just personal rebellion, just personal desire for gain. Is a very different matter than individuals seeing an unjust situation and saying, we're rebelling against the injustice, the unjust situation that we see around us. And that could be motivated by a love for your neighbor. And that actually would supersede the, hey, just follow the rules because that's what you're supposed to do. And that's why we see in the early church a rebellion against government authorities over preaching the gospel, where they would say, oh yeah, I see you're telling us not to preach the gospel, but my love for others and my love for Christ circumvents that particular law, because I'm not preaching Christ out of some personal gain, but out of a desire for the gospel, my love for others, my love for God. So in that regard, I'm willing to face the consequences of government restriction that I'm going to violate, because there's a greater law at work. Romans 13 is not about a greater law at work. It's about people just being rebellious. Just going, I'm driving where I want to drive. I'm paying taxes when I want to pay taxes, those kinds of things. So I think that's the distinction. So with the American Revolution, was there some personal driven motives there? Yeah, probably. But there was also a lot of corporate driven motives there, and love for others and love for justice that seemed to motivate a whole group of people. And so there are times that are appropriate for what we call civil disobedience, because of the explicit evil of the governments involved or the rulers involved. All right, good question. We'll see you guys Sunday night.